Okay, chapter 21, and this begins section 6 in the textbook, 7th edition, NASM Certified Personal Trainer textbook. And so this section is on program design, and chapter 21 is going to begin this section. It's going to be on the Optimum Performance Training Model. So basically what we've done is we've gotten now to the point where we can start using the OPT model to basically give outlines and samples of actual training programs. Normally, it's based on periodization, and we'll go through that in a chapter. But keep in mind now, this chapter really has more samples and ideas on how to actually implement programming than anything else. It's actually really good chapter, given all of the academic material that we've gotten to this point. What NASM has done is they basically said, look, we have the system, we know how to integrate all this material. Let's show you how to do it and what it actually looks like. And so basically what we're going to do is get some review. Once again, on their sidebars, there's a fair amount of review from the previous chapters, and as well there should be, because now you need to take some of that information and apply it. So remember, the OPT model is based on this idea of an integrated system that takes all the components, necessary variables of training for health and wellness, and puts them all into a very strategic, formalized plan that allows people to make the appropriate progressions and train at the appropriate intensity and levels, irrespective of their starting conditions. That's kind of the beauty of the model itself. And in one sense, as they say at the very beginning, a big part of this is based on client adherence, because at the end of the day, we want clients to be able to start, maintain, and be consistent for the long term in their training plan. So really anything you can do that's going to help assist with that is going to be part of or underlying sort of the spirit of the training of this system to begin with. So before we start, remember, paper, something to write with. Read, write, recite is the recommended study technique, along with whatever other beneficial techniques you find are going to help you. So, okay, chapter 21, Introduction to Program Design. Remember, you can know everything there is to know about anatomy, physiology, all these terms, but how are you going to apply that into the real world to help your client with their exercise program? That's where program design comes in. That's where having this systematized performance training system really helps. So as we move through the very beginning on the introduction, we're going to get into some review, kinetic chain, as well as overtraining, and then program design itself. So training plans, which is begins on page 679. The training plans are really based on a concept that we have used for decades, called periodization. And normally what we would do with athletes, and it's still done today, is we take a large macro view. Normally it's an annual, based on an annual view of a training schedule, right? So we know that in a 12-month period, most athletes have an actual phase where they're competing, right? So their competitive season could be 2 months, could be 5 months, could be 6 months, but whatever it is, there's a training season. Then there's sort of a transitional phase that gets them back into a off-season training that allows them to now work on muscle imbalances that might have occurred during the training season, injuries, things like that, and working then to get them prepped for the next season. And then they would move. So there's conditioning and moving into a preseason type of training. And then they would move into season. Again, we call this periodization. So we have what are known as macro cycles, and then mesocycles, and then microcycles. So normally it's an annual, broken into monthly cycles, and then broken into weekly. Normally that's how you do it. But they are flexible in the total time frame that you have people in these periodization timeframes. So fundamentals of periodization, we have an annual plan, which is called the macrocycle. And of course, you can see that we have a list here, general basic understanding of an annual, sort of an annual training plan. So in January, we'd be doing transition or off season, and then you can read through, and it shows you basically how the athlete under ideal conditions is going to train throughout the year in a very broad general sense. And then if we move into and we take that big picture and we take bite-sized pieces or a mesocycle, you can now see the monthly training plan. And now we're getting into the specifics: cardio, resistance, SAQ, and then reassess. So these are the ways that we would then look at the training program from a monthly perspective. And now what we need to do is we need to look at the actual training schedule program on a weekly basis, and that's the microcycle. And so the microcycle is cardio on Monday, and in this case, resistance on Tuesday, and of course, the specifics of the actual workout, right? This is the periodization schedule, but the actual training is what we go through as the chapter goes on. Normally, we see, or we have used, what's known as a linear periodization schedules. And linear simply means that we're simply increasing the intensity of the training over an extended period of time and subsequently decreasing the total volume. So that's what you're seeing in figure 21.5. So this linear periodization. Well, workouts get harder and harder and harder, but the total volume of work goes down because they are different variables that need to be taken into account together when we're going through our normal training cycle. So probably making it more complicated. It's really simple. Anytime you increase the intensity over an extended period of time, you got to lower the total volume. Otherwise, you'll go into an overtraining state. That's a linear training periodization model. Then there's what's known as undulating or non-linear. And as the name says, we're not doing this linear increase. We're actually changing up the intensity and the volume throughout the micro and mesocycle within a macrocycle. So normally we look at those linear and non-linear periodization for athletes. Just keep in mind that it really, in one sense, doesn't matter what I set out on an annual basis for my client. They go on vacation, they miss workouts. You see, there's the ideal, and it makes sense ideally because athletes are generally going to be a whole lot more consistent in their training than a client is. So, but it's a great idea. Obviously, we use it. We've been using it forever for athletes. So now we move into the actual OPT model itself. Remember, there are 3 stages with five phases, and the rest of the chapter is going to give you all the information you need basically to create these basic programs. And so here's the deal when you're going through the rest of this chapter. Number 1, the tables. The tables are where you're going to spend the most of your time because that's where they have basically taken all of the written material and put them into very nicely packaged information units. So table 21.3 gives you a great summary of the OPT model itself, right? The different levels and the different phases. By the way, if you know the primary adaptations and the primary methods, you're halfway, 3/4 of the way there. So the daily workout template, you have a warm-up, and they give you a obviously sample. And this is basically how NASM tries to help create a systematized approach to training and the actual workout itself. So this right here on page 686 is the actual daily workout itself. It's not a bad idea. It's very, very well laid out and hits all of the variables and acute variables that we talked about in previous chapters. There's the warm-up phase, there's the activation phase, and again, these are terms that you would normally associate with, for instance, the actual workout component or the cardio component, things like that. That's what they have listed down for you. So the activation list that you're going to put down: skill development, right? These are the exercises that are going to be designed to help develop neuromuscular efficiency, for instance. Then there is the resistance training part of this. This is the main part. As you're going through this chapter, just keep in mind, for the most part, a lot of the other variables here are pretty straightforward, but from a knowledge-based standpoint, a lot of the manipulation and the variety that you're going to add into workouts, aside from SAQ, but you're not doing that with all your clients, is resistance training. So you got to know, you're going to know anything when we go through these tables, and there are lots of tables in here that you need to essentially understand and memorize the basic variables themselves. So skill development, resistance training, and then there's this new thing that NASM put in, which is called client's choice. Basically, the idea is that if clients kind of like what they do and they get to choose the exercises or a group of exercises or one exercise, for instance, it makes them feel autonomous, and that increases self-efficacy. They will train longer and for extended periods of time. And there it is. Why not just let the client look? We've been doing this for decades. Every time I train clients, I would always ask them, what do you like to train? Did you like those dumbbell curls? I hate dumbbell curls. Well, what would you like to do? Oh, I really like those cable. That's what we're doing. Okay. Oh man, I really hate doing that exercise. Then guess what? We're not doing that exercise unless it's like squats or something like that you have no choice. You must do squats. Hate to tell you. So client's choice gives this sense of autonomy, and then that should build self-efficacy. That leads then ultimately to the cool down. And remember, the cool down is critical, because people can have problems, of course, if they don't cool down, heart issues, cardiorespiratory issues as well. And now you're back to a little bit of review: length, tension, relationship, right? So now kind of the start, okay? Take a deep breath, get ready, because now starts the model itself. So stabilization level, right? So in the stabilization level, there's really only one phase. It's called the stabilization endurance training phase. And there are training fundamental movement patterns, and kind of the idea, we've gone over this before, is that there are some basic fundamental movement patterns: squatting, hip hinging, pulling, pushing, pressing movements, and then multiplanar movements. And that kind of describes all the different ways that the human body can move in sort of gross motor ways. And so the squat, for instance, and then other movements like the hip hinging, which you can do, of course, with the kettlebell. So again, as you go through this chapter, for instance, you're going to see that the different tables hit these six different movement patterns, and each one gives you the category. So musculature that's involved with it, right? Primary joint, for instance, and it's going to tell you, memorize these tables. Read, write, and just keep reading and rewriting until you know these tables by heart. By the way, you already know probably enough about the squat. You probably know a fair bit about the hip hinge, right? The goal is to go through it and really get these things down. Pulling and pushing, same thing. You have tables, obviously 21.6 and 21.7. And again, the goal here is to understand the movements, what muscles, what joints are involved, what the examples are. For instance, daily examples. They give you an example of opening a door. Okay, that makes sense. These are the things that I could actually talk to my clients about. So the pulling and the pushing movements, and then of course, getting into the final one, which is the pressing movement. So basically multiplanar movements, which is going to be the last one, of course. Multiplanar movements are basically those things that involve multiple other movement patterns, right? So pulling and opening up a door and turning a body, multiplanar movements, increasing proprioceptive demands. So nice little recap here on phase one stabilization. And then of course, now we move through into the next grouping, stabilization level warm-up. So designing a actual training program. So now what NASM does is they tell you about it, and now they're going to say, here's how you do it. Here's what your stabilization level warm-up should look like. Here's what your activation, remember that sheet that we looked at, that daily workout sheet had all of these. So the warm-up, stabilization, activation, skill development, okay, remember, and then the resistance training itself, client's choice, and cool down. So stop for a second. Stop, take a deep breath, because as soon as you get to page 699, it's right there for you. Take your book and sit there like this, and that, all of that that was in there, that's great, read it. But now your focus is on this right here. I know it looks like a lot of material to try and memorize, but trust me, when you understand it, it's a lot easier to go through it and write down the actual variables. I would literally, I've done this before, but I would say that it's a really good idea. And let me just go ahead and share this real quick, and I'll show you exactly what I do. It's literally this simple. So I've got my book and I got my sheet, and I basically write my table out. The physicality, please trust me, the physicality of doing this is really important. Now look, you could go ahead and create a bunch of these. You're going to need them. You're going to need one of these, right? For every phase that you're doing, that you're training. So keep that in mind. Your goal ultimately is to be able to write that down and rewrite it over and over and over. And that is your ultimate goal. So again, I just wanted you to see again, that's the way I would do it. I would sit there and I would write it out. And does it take time? Yes, but it's efficient. Once you do it once, you'll actually remember a fair amount of the material. You do it twice and you start doing it over and over and over. Trust me, you will actually memorize the material. So now, again, as you're moving through the rest of this chapter, you're now going to get through the different phases. So the strength level, remember there's 3 phases in the strength level. Phase 2, strength endurance. Phase 3, hypertrophy or muscular development. Phase 4, maximal strength. There's a way to train. There's a way to do this that NASM says is ideal to maximize whatever that goal is. And so you can develop your different programs, but watch what happens. I read through this. I can see the example of supersets. Remember, phase 2 is all about doing appropriate supersets, right? Doing a strength movement with an endurance movement. Normally the one that I like to use is a dumbbell press or bench press, supersetted with something like just push-ups. And I might do push-ups on the Bosu ball or something that allows for endurance type of training with a little bit of proprioceptively rich environmental conditions. So as I move through, look what we got, right? We're back to table 2111 with phase 2. Remember, in chapter 21, your main goal is to go through that material and then look through these charts, and that's where you're going to spend your time. So now we move into phase 4, maximal strength training synopsis. Of course, again, you've got your table and you've got another table. So chapter 21 is all about going through these tables and looking through. And the idea here is, remember, the resistance training component, remember what we talked about with acute variables. What are your acute variables? You already, see, this is the thing that I try to help students understand, is that for the most part, you already know probably half the material, just intuitively from your training, your own bedrock of knowledge. Some people less, some people more, but remember, if you already exercise, you already know a fair amount of this material. Your goal is to systematize it in your brain, in your head, the way NASM has done it. And it actually makes sense when you do it. So there's basically your last table. And so now the idea is, how do you apply it? And we're on page 712. You can now look, what NASM is doing is they're now giving you this. Here is an example, or here's some ideas that you might want to consider now from an annual plan, monthly, and then a weekly plan to apply the OPT model. And so if you're trying to increase lean body mass, well, what is your goal? You've got to get to phase 3, basically, right? You got to get into that phase that speaks to muscular development or hypertrophy. How would you do that? Well, here's a general plan. If you can actually make every workout and your client comes to every workout and they're eating well and right, all of those other variables and components are in place, this is a great way. This is a great way to do it. And that's what you're seeing in these different figures. By all means, take those, use them, and apply them to yourself and then to your clients. And so again, now we're looking at applying the OPT model for improving general sports performance. NASM is covering the entire gamut of the type of individuals that you're probably or maybe going to see as clients. So here again, you have an annual plan and your monthly plan. You don't have to memorize, you really don't have to memorize any of this. Basically, what NASM has done is says, look, here's a great way to go about accomplishing this particular goal. And then you've got a monthly plan. Here's what NASM understands when it comes to the OPT model. Everybody's unique. So everybody has different goals, and we have different ways we're going to achieve those goals. Not everybody is going to make all their workouts. There is an ideal scenario. The OPT model gives you an ideal situation on an annual, monthly, weekly plan. Depending on what the particular goal is or where the client is starting. Now your weekly plan and then your individual workouts, right, are going to follow along. Keep in mind that weekly plan is going to be different for your clients. It's also going to be based on your business model. If my client trains once a week, that makes it, in one sense, it makes it really easy for me from a training perspective because I can't do a whole lot. I've only got one day a week to train them. If I've got 3 days a week, 4 days a week, whatever the case is, then my monthly plan can break out into my weekly microcycles and actual training sessions themselves in a little more detail. So that is chapter 21. It's a obviously really important chapter. Go through the summary, the chapter review, and of course, obviously go through the chapter highlights. This is it's a really good chapter, a lot of really good information that you can use for yourself, obviously, as well as obviously when you're going to be training your clients. So chapter 21 coming to a close. Chapter 22 is next, and I look forward to seeing you on that chapter.